say record to the cloud.
Yep. Okay.
Okay, Judy, why don't you?
Okay, I'd like to dedicate our learning for the refuah shlema of my granddaughter Meira Nessa Bat Yochana Brina. She needs a refuah shlema.
Oh,
She's in the
sorry to hear
hospital.
that.
Yes, no, she had a cold, rhinovirus. It's just a cold, but that triggered her asthma. So
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm sorry to hear that. How old is she?
She's just a little over a year, about a year and a half.
A little baby. Oh, wow. It should be well.
Thank you. Thank you.
For her health.
Right, so why don't we start, I'm sure more people will come on board as we go, so that Teddy usually gets on board and things like that. So why don't we get started? You take it away. It's your game.
Okay, good. So again, good morning. I don't know if people remember, but I've done this before many years ago. And so it was a pleasure. In years past, my father-in-law, Leo Flato, was a member of this group, a member of this year. I don't know if people remember him.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, so unfortunately, he's also not doing so well and also needs a refuah shlema. But really, thank you, Bert, for inviting me. It's always a pleasure and always a chance to learn. And I think that two things I would say is that number one, my wife believes that some of you might know this, that Yiddish is my native tongue. I grew up speaking Yiddish. I grew up in the Rabbinic community. Blah 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 blah. So my wife believes that when they taught me English, they forgot to teach me the word no. And then anytime someone asks me to say something, to teach or do something, says yes, yes, yes. So that's number one. I just don't know how to turn people down. But the truth is, whatever. I would never say no to Bert. Bert is a dear friend, and Bert is a fellow traveler and similar journeys. And we go back, as some of you might know, we go back to how many years ago was it, Bert?
Oh God, how many times? 20 years ago, 15 years ago, maybe more. It was in New Jersey, at the one of the facilities in Princeton, I think it was.
Yes.
I mean, it was. It was very, and just as an aside, for the people in the group, that Rabbi Katz's wife is extraordinary, as well as he is. I mean, she's
Thank you.
A real scholar.
She's the real deal. I'm just a imposter.
Yeah, that's sort of like what my college roommate was Mike Schmidman. I don't know if you know Michael. Mike is a. Got a doctorate from Harvard in Jewish history, and he's been teaching for many years. He always was part of a group that I was part of on the fringe of, Shalom Karmi and a whole bunch of other YU type historians, Jewish historians, all whom were brilliant. Anyway, continue.
Yeah. Anyway, so again, thank you, Bert, and also Gloria, for inviting me. I'll be upfront and be very honest. I have an agenda. It's my lifelong agenda, and that is, I'm 58, and for the last 50 years or so, all I've been doing is studying Gemara and nothing else. As I said, I grew up in the Haredi community, and as some of you might know, in the Haredi community, we don't do Tanakh so much. We jump in right away to Gemara. So basically, since I was 6 or 7 years old, I started doing Gemara, and I've been doing it ever since. Love it like mad. Really enjoy it tremendously. The learning Gemara, teaching Gemara, and so forth. And, part of me has an agenda to kind of show people what's so amazing about Chazal, and what's so amazing Chazal, which is the traditional word for the rabbis in the Talmud, Chachmeinu Zichronim Libracha. And a big part of my agenda is actually something that I've seen myself over the years from teaching Talmud, but also something that I've drawn a lot of inspiration from. I'm going to blank on a name right now. Vered Noam. Anybody familiar with Dr. Vered Noam? Anybody heard of her?
With what?
Vered Noam. She's an Israeli scholar. Anybody familiar?
No.
Oh my gosh. I only saw Judy responding. Bert, are you familiar with Bert Noam? Okay, so I don't know about those of you who are off screen. If you can get on screen, it will be easier. It's a little bit hard to teach when the screens are dark unless you have to. But if you can put on your screen, that will be wonderful. But if you don't know about Vered Noam, you have to do one thing when this year is over, and that is Google Dr. Vered Noam. In fact, you know what? Let me just show you a picture quickly of who she is.
Excuse me, Rabbi.
Yes.
You're speaking too fast. Okay.
Oh,
I
gosh,
cannot process what you're saying. So you have to
Okay.
speak, if possible, if you could speak a little slower so
I'll
that
try.
we could
I'll
get,
try.
okay. I know that you're, fast and so forth, but
Yeah. I've been accused before of being speaking very fast. That's hard for me, but I'll try my best. Okay.
Thank you. I
So
appreciate it.
I appreciate that you're telling me. So this is Dr. Vered Noam, and don't be misled by the size. She's nigh high, nigh tall, but an incredible scholar. And also, in addition to just being an incredible scholar, she's also a great thinker. She's written extensively on a lot of contemporary issues from a very deeply powerful and passionate place. Full disclosure, her kind of lingua franca, the language she writes and teaches in is in Hebrew. She's an Israeli scholar, but some of her books and essays have been translated into English. So definitely look
What's
her
her
up.
last name? What's her last name?
Vered Noam, Vered, and the last name is Noam, Noam. Dr. Vered Noam.
Thank you.
And just if you Google her essay is going to come up right away and you see it. So anyway, she's an incredible scholar. She's written extensively. But one of her most powerful books that she's written is one in which she took one of the most difficult subjects in Talmud, which is the laws of Tumah and Tahara, the laws of purity and impurity. And she did the following, which is, let me ask you a quick quiz. When you kind of want to discuss the chronology of Jewish scholarship, right? You start with Tanakh and you move on to the next era and the next era and the next era. What would that list be? After Tanakh, what comes after Tanakh? Anybody?
Nevi'im.
To Torah, then Nevi'im, right? Correct. What comes after Nevi'im?
Ketuvim.
Ketuvim. And what comes after Tanakh?
The Talmud.
The Talmud, which is made up of the Mishnah and
Mishnah.
Exactly. And then after
Gemara.
Mishnah, Gemara, after Gemara, Rishonim, and then Achron. Well, it turns out that that's what we thought for hundreds of years, till we found out otherwise. Anybody know what was the big discovery? I think sometimes in the 60s, there was this major discovery in Jewish history that changed the trajectory of Jewish chronology. Anybody familiar? What was the big discovery?
The Dead Sea Scrolls?
Yes, very good, Judy.
I just
Very,
guessed.
very, very good. Sometimes in the 60s, I don't know the exact year, there's a fascinating story with a shepherd, right? A shepherd was tending his flock, and all of a sudden, one of his sheep ran to the door of a cave and ran into the cave. The goat or the sheep ran into the cave. The shepherd followed him, and in that cave, the shepherd found these barrels with texts. Anyway, long story short, they put together those texts, and they were kind of, worn out, they were brittle, they were half broken. And they basically were able to kind of put together an entire Tanakh, but very different than our Tanakh. And long story short, scholars started researching where is it from, who is the origin, what is the basis for that. It turns out that prior to the Rabbinic community, i.e. the Mishnah and the Gemara and so on and so forth, there was actually a very robust Jewish community called the Qumran community. And they had a very robust Judaism, a very advanced, a very sophisticated, and a very robust Judaism that was been articulated through the texts that the scholars were able to reconstitute based on what they found in the Qumran caves. And one of the things that Vered Noam has done so impressively, and that's what I don't want to use this as the basis for what I'm going to share with you today, is that she has compared and contrasted the Qumran's community's attitudes towards laws of Tumah and Tahara, towards laws of purity and impurity, in comparison to the rabbinic, the rabbi in the Mishnah, in the Talmud's attitude. And something that Vered has shown consistently is that repeatedly the rabbis were the moderns relative to the Qumran community's conservatives, lowercase c. The rabbis in general, Vered has shown, and then other scholars have picked up on that and shown as well, the rabbis tend to be the more moderate, the more lenient, the more accommodating scholars throughout Judaism again and again and again. So much so that at some point it becomes very clear that this is not just a fluke or a distraction. Consistently, when it comes to issues of halacha, the rabbis were always the more moderns relative to the preceding community that was much more conservative, much more reactionary, much more stringent, and so on and so forth. Once I read this book by Vered, and I've kind of embraced that mantle, it has become almost unavoidable. In every arena of halacha, in every area of Jewish law, time and again, if you look closely and very intently, you notice the rabbis have a tendency to bring moderation, to bring sensitivity, to bring thoughtfulness. I mean, I'm trying to kind of find the right adjectives because these adjectives are sensitive. But there's a general tendency in Chazal to be kind of the moderns relative to a more conservative community. And what I want to do today and the next session, which is going to be in the 27th, is pick the area of divorce and aguna and show you how, starting with the Talmudic rabbis and then continuing with the medieval rabbis, there actually is a pretty robust attempt to create a more egalitarian halacha. I'm using a big word. And that's what I'm going to show you today, and then moving on with the next session. So with that background, let's jump right into the text and just explore it right away. If I asked you, anybody, biblical divorce, what do you know about a biblical divorce? Just tell me, what do you know about it? What is it? What happens? How does it happen? Who does it? What's done? What do you know about biblical divorce? Anybody?
You have to get a get.
You have to get a get? Sure. Number one. What else? What else do we know about
the woman has to accept the get.
The woman has to accept the get. We're on a good trajectory. Anybody want to pick up on what Judy said, and what more do we know about the gender aspect of a get?
The husband has to give the get. I mean, there's a whole
His
big.
own free will.
The man has complete and absolute agency in a get,
He has
and
to
the
give
woman
the
has
get.
zero agency, right? The man has absolute agency, and the woman no agency. In other words, the man is an active player and the woman is a passive player, right? In fact, I'm going to share my screen with you now. And if you look at the pasuk, right, the pasuk is very explicit. The pasuk says, here's the verse, just a second, right? Ki yikach isha, I'll read in Hebrew and translate. Ki yikach ish isha uba'ala. If a man would take a woman and they would be together. V'haya im lo timtza chen be'einav. And what would happen if she would not find favor in his eyes? Ki matza ba'erva davar, because he found something inappropriate. I'll come back to that in a second. The katav la, and he should write for her sefer kritut, a book that will sever the relationship. V'natan be'yada, and he should give her into her hands. V'shilcha beito, and he should send her away. Very much he. She's almost non-existent in the book, right? When it comes to the Mishnah, one would argue, if I could be a little bit disrespectful, it gets even worse, right? The Mishnah in Gittin has a very famous discussion of grounds for divorce, right? What are grounds for divorce, right? Beit Shammai Omrim, the Beit Shammai said, Lo yegarish adam et ishto, a man cannot divorce his wife, ela im kain matzah devar erva, only if he found something sexually inappropriate, right? So according to Beit Shammai, the only grounds for divorce is sexual impropriety. Beit Hillel omrim, the Beit Hillel comes in and very shocking, and again, we can talk about this whole separate share. For now, I'm just doing this as background information. So some of this is going to be quite disturbing and quite troubling. But for now, let's kind of just go through it. If she burns the food, the soup was a little bit too hot or too cold, booms, we're going to Rabbi. We're going for divorce. And Rabbi Akiva is even worse, so to speak. Rabbi Akiva, even if you find someone prettier than her, that's grounds enough for divorce. So pretty much when we come to the Mishnah, the lack of agency and the lack of active participation of a divorce on the part of the woman doesn't exist at all. And it's quite shocking for us moderns. What's it? For us moderns, it's pretty hard to kind of see, the level of, imbalance, right, between the husband's active role and the woman's passive role. Now, what I want to show you today, exactly like I said, is how.
It's better than nothing. Okay, so it's cooler in here because you have the window open.
What I'm going to show you today is incremental expressions within the tradition of discomfort of this imbalance, right? Incremental expressions within the tradition of a discomfort with this imbalance. By the time we get to the medieval period, it is pretty shocking. So if we start with the first, what I call the soft Talmudic pushback, and that's already still in that Gemara. The Gemara says, yes, in theory, one can divorce their wife against their will. But then the Gemara says, I'll read it in English. Rabbi Elazar said, with regard to anyone who divorces his first wife, even the altar sheds tears over him. As it is stated, and then kind of the Gemara brings a whole pasuk, basically says, the Mizbeach is sad for divorcing the first wife. Meaning, don't divorce her so frivolously, don't divorce her so simply. So, kind of interesting what that means. I mean, what's the connection of the Mizbeach with divorce, and why is the Mizbeach crying? Anybody, any idea of what is that? How did the Mizbeach become a factor in divorce? Anybody?
You stand in front of the chuppah, and
Yep.
It's part of the whole what do you call it? The ketuvah has
Yep.
a certain commitment and
Right.
connection with Yerushalayim. That's why we break the glass. So the Beit
Interesting.
HaMikdash.
So there is this connection made to Jerusalem. Right. So the truth is, I think the connection is even deeper than Tova. Tova, is that your name?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Just checking if the name that shows up on Zoom is the real name. So
Yeah.
So the truth is the connection is even deeper. I find that actually one of the most shocking theological statements in the Talmud is the statement that you have on your screen. Anybody want to read that?
Ish v'isha shechina
Shruya b'neiha.
b'neihem.
Yeah. So what does that mean, anybody? God is in the center of the spousal relationship.
Yeah.
Right? The rabbis basically took this kind of very corporeal idea, this very material idea, and basically elevated its theological significance radically by claiming that actually it's a divine, metaphysically divine and spiritual relationship. Ish ve'isha, husband and wife, shechina shruya b'neihem, the divine presence is within the couple, right? And in fact, you know where it comes from, right? If you look at my screen, right? Basically what they do is they say, husband and wife have in common two letters, Aleph Shin, Aleph Shin. Aleph Shin, Aleph Shin is Ish. What is the one letter that distinguishes husband from wife?
Hashem. Hey.
The Yud in the husband's name and the Hey in the wife's name. What does that mean? Because in that fiery passion of love and commitment, there is a divine presence, so to speak, metaphorically, allegorically, and so on and so forth. So when the rabbis say the Mizbeach cries when there's a divorce, what they're saying basically is a relationship also has metaphysical, spiritual significance. And when you break up a relationship, it's not just, two people just kind of grew apart and stopped the relationship. There's also a spiritual, metaphysical component. So that's kind of, so to speak, what I call a soft pushback. But then, in the Gemara, there's actually a pretty impressive hard pushback. against this this gender imbalance. And that is the ketubah. People don't know this. People know every marriage needs a ketubah, but people don't know the role of ketubah is pretty shocking and surprising. And that's what I want to share with you, and then we'll go to something else. So I want to make something very clear, right? Like, this is a ketubah. I just had a picture of a nice, beautiful ketubah. There's such beautiful ketubahs out there. People often make the mistake. A ketubah is not a form of kiddushin, right? One can do kiddushin with a star, which is different. Ketubah comes after the betrothal, right? A man can betroth a woman with a ring or with a star. But then, in addition to doing betrothal, there's also a thing of a ketubah, right? We all know that, right? After the husband has given the ring to the wife, we read the ketubah. What is the ketubah? Anybody know what the ketubah is?
A contract.
And what is the primary content of the ketubah? Anybody know?
Tells what the responsibilities are of each person.
No, of
Yes.
the husband to the wife, not each person. Correct?
Okay. That is there as well, but what else is in a ketubah that is actually the primary impetus for a ketubah? Anybody know? It's not so well known.
The wife has to do what the husband says, has to be.
Nope, that's not in the ketubah. I'm sorry, Tova. That's not in the ketubah. That's not in the ketubah. What is, maybe someone told it that that's the case, but it's not in the ketubah. What is the primary content of ketubah? What people have said is they're true. What people don't know, what is the primary content of the ketubah?
The support.
Nope. That's there too. I'm not saying that's not there, but that is not the primary impetus.
It tells you what
happens in case of
breaks the
divorce?
relationship. In other words, what happens if they're not committed to each other? Or, I don't know.
What happens in case of divorce is
Exactly. People don't know what an audacious, gutsy document the ketubah is. The ketubah, I like to say, is the first example we have of a rabbinic attempt, so to speak, it's a little bit of an audacious term, fixing God's Torah. And what does that mean? We just saw how easy it is for a husband to divorce his wife, right? He is the agent, and whether it's because there was infidelity, whether she is not such a good cook, whether he's not so attracted to her, boom, 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 whatever he wants, he can just send a divorce. That is the thing that the rabbis were uncomfortable with, and so to speak, they wanted to fix the Torah. And how do they fix the Torah? By imposing a penalty every time a husband divorces their wife. And that's called the ketubah. And that is a certain amount of money that anytime, no matter under what circumstances, it might be under the most peaceful, most, mutually agreed upon scenarios, a get requires a penalty. Why? Here is the line in the Gemara for why. The rabbis tell us the reason was, why do we do a ketubah? Two behind a tama. Why did the rabbis impose a ketubah? You should remember 4 words from today's shir will be the following 4 words. Kelo, tehei, hala, ve'enaf, le'otziyah. It is too easy for a husband to just get rid of a wife when things go wrong, and we don't want that to happen. Did you hear just what I said? It is too easy. Who made it too easy?
The Torah.
The Torah. And the rabbis thought that's not okay. And because they thought it was not okay, they, so to speak, fixed it by imposing a penalty on a husband every time there is a divorce. And that is what the ketubah document is. Now, once we wrote a document and they said, by the chuppah, you have to write a document in which you commit yourself to paying a penalty in case of divorce, they said, you know what? It's also write in all the other obligations that the husband has and all the kind of financial responsibilities, emotional responsibilities. But the primary impetus of the ketubah is Something is wrong with the way biblical marriage, just one second, the way biblical marriage happens. We need to fix it. And we need to fix it by imposing a penalty on a husband. And then Tosos just kind of supplements and says, well, then why is there also a ketubah when a husband dies? Right? A woman who is widowed also gets a ketubah money. Why is there a ketubah money for when a husband dies? So Tosos says, he asked the question, if the main purpose of ketubah is because it's too easy for a husband to divorce, then why does an almana get ketubah? There's no divorce involved. Why would they impose a ketubah on almana? And the answer is, they wanted to create uniformity, right? Once they say when a marriage dissolves, there is a bonus, so to speak, for the woman. They said, every time when a marriage dissolves, there will be a amount of money that goes to the woman. But really, the primary purpose was, it is just too easy. And again, I want to come back to what I said in quoting Vered. It is quite shocking to me that the rabbis would have the comfort to say, the way the Torah set it up is not good. The way the Torah set it up, it's not good. Something is wrong there. We can't break the Torah, but we can make the Torah difficult. Basically, that's what they're saying, right? The Torah makes it easy. We don't want it to be easy. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to impose a penalty. Go ahead, Bert. You had a question.
Was the penalty ever, it says fixed penalty in the Ksuba, right? Is there any time when it was actually considered a significant penalty as opposed to now when it's not?
Yeah, so I mean, I want to be kind of a little bit transparent with you. What I'm going to do today in an hour basically took 20 shiurim that I did. I teach a class on Monday night, the Gemara shiur on Monday night on Zoom, which everybody's invited to join if you want to join me. And we did Masechet Gittin, and we explored this in depth, and I did 20 shiurim on that. So Bert's question is a very big question, which is a ketubah. Today, ketubah runs, people believe, between $5,000, maybe $10,000, maybe less. So the question has become over the years, originally when the Jewish community was much more impoverished, that sum meant a lot. Today, it doesn't mean so much. So there are discussions about changing that and what does that do with the numbers and so on and so forth. But you're right that the imposition is not as great as it was originally. Yeah, that's for sure. Okay. This is, so to speak, a pretty decent pushback, but now I'm going to show you a real crazy pushback. And that pushback is a tribute to Rabbeinu Gershom. Anybody know who Rabbeinu Gershom was?
He was the one who said you.
I see, David, you're bobbing your head. You don't know who Rabbeinu Gershom was. Anybody know who Rabbeinu Gershom was? Maybe if I phrase it this way, maybe you might know about it. Kerem the Rabbeinu Gershom. Did you hear about Kerem Rabbeinu Gershom in your life? Judy, what do you know about Kerem Rabbeinu Gershom? What do you know about it?
Until Rabbeinu Gershom, one man could marry as many wives as possible, but Rabbi Gershom decreed about monogamy, only one woman for one man.
Yes, so it's interesting that Judy would pick this one. So Rabbeinu Gershom, let me first give you his dates. Rabbeinu Gershom was a medieval scholar. His dates are 960 to 1040. We don't know so much about him. We know a little bit about him. One of the things we know about him is been a very complicated story, which is that his son actually converted to Christianity. And there's a big debate because there are two versions of what happened when that happened. The one version said that he sat Shiva for the son when the son converted to Christianity. Another version is, no, when that son subsequently died, he did not sit Shiva because the son converted to Christianity. And there's a third version which says, no, the exact opposite. That in spite of the fact that his son converted to Christianity, when he died, he nevertheless mourned his death and all. Anyway, that's one thing that Rabbeinu Gershom is famous for. I don't know if you grew up with that. When I'm not young, in the sense that I still lived at a time when we used to write letters, and we, especially during the summer when we were in camp, we would write letters to our parents and our parents would write letters to us. So I don't know if people are familiar with that. There's a Cherem Rabbeinu Gershom, right? There is a band of Rabbeinu Gershom who read other people's letters, right? So I remember whenever there'd be a letter, it was like, hey, don't read it. This is Cherem Rabbeinu Gershom. So that's one thing that he's famous for. Another thing that he's famous for is what Judy said, polygamy, right? Even though in halacha, one can have more than one wife, a man can have multiple wives, and a woman can't, which we're not going to talk about today. But halachically, a man can have more than one wife. Rabbeinu Gershom banned polygamy. This is nothing yet compared to the craziest terem of Rabbeinu Gershom. Rabbeinu Gershom made the following decree, right? And here's the English. Rabbeinu Gershom decreed by threat of excommunication not to give a get to a woman against her will. And such a get is null and void. The Mishnah says, the Torah says that a husband can give a woman a get whenever he pleases, how he pleases, when much he pleases. And Rabbi Gershom said, no, I don't allow that. And since then, this halakha that is on the books, right? The Torah said that a husband can divorce his wife whenever he wants. It's been the kabush. It doesn't exist anymore, this halakha. Because when Rabbeinu Gershom came along, he said, that's it. No, I don't allow that. Now the question is, why would he do that? What was the basis for him going so audaciously against explicit halakha? Now, are you ready for this? Look at this. This is shocking to me. The Rosh, who is a 12th, 13th century scholar, comes about 200 years after Rabbeinu Gershom, explains the reason for why Rabbeinu Gershom imposed a ban on divorcing a woman against her will. I'll read it in English. It's shocking. Because he saw that the generation was unrestrained and treated the daughters of Israel with contempt by casting them off with a bill of divorce, he instituted an ordinance to equalize, did you hear that? Equalize the power of the wife with the power of the husband. This is not some Chovevei open Orthodox rabbi saying, oh, equality, egalitarianism. This is the Rosh in the 12th century said that there was an imbalance, there was an inequality, and Rabbeinu Gershom wanted to restore the equality. To equalize the power of the wife with the power of the husband, just as a man may divorce a woman with his consent, so too a woman is only divorced with her consent. I mean, in the Hebrew, it's even more powerful. V'tikein Rabbeinu Gershom decreed lahashvot koach ha'isha koach ha'rish, to create an equality. It is so shocking to me when I read it every time. Taught this source so many times, and is a 10th century source says we need to create some equality. The Chassam Sofer has a little bit of a different formulation. The Chassam Sofer is much later, right? He's an 18th, 19th century scholar. V'hus, I'll read the Hebrew and then translate because it's also a powerful language. V'husiag l'Torah, it's kind of a getter for the Torah. Why? Even sherabu pritzim shezilzelu bebnot Yisrael hahaganot, because this kind of expressed the disrespect, the disdain for Jewish women. But erev hi ba ubaboker hi shava. Anybody know which language he's using here? This is a quote from a biblical verse. Anybody remember where it shows up? This phrase, but erev hi ba ubaboker hi shava. Where is that used?
Was that from Rachel and Yaakov?
No,
And Leah?
Achashverosh, right? Achashverosh and his concubines. They would show up at night, and in the morning he would get rid of them. And the Chassam Sofer says, men cannot treat their wives like that. Oh, we are married for 2 weeks, we're married for 2 years, we're married for 20 years, and then tomorrow I think, yeah, it's over, I'm out. That is the disdain for Jewish women. We cannot allow that, and therefore impose the ban. And I want to go back to the language of the ban. Because the language of the ban is quite powerful. What do you notice about this particular formulation? Take a look at it closely. What do you notice? It's a very precise language. Anybody?
Well, it's the excommunication. It's very severe. In other
First of
words,
all, it's really severe, right? He doesn't tell you, I think it would be a bad idea. I'm a Rishon. I'm
No,
kind of
it's very-
sorry. I think it's not good. He's going to put you in Kherem. You will be expelled from the Jewish community if you do such a thing. That's number one. What else do you notice, anybody? I want to hear from the people who don't speak. There are too many people who are very quiet. I don't like quiet.
That if the gives a divorce, that under those circumstances, that it's not a valid divorce.
That's huge. That's huge, right? That is a whole nother level of utilizing authority, right? It's one thing when a rabbi says, well, I don't know if you should do that. I strongly advise against you doing that. I think if you do that, I'll impose a chera. He is taking it to a whole nother level of utilizing his rabbinic authority over the Torah. You realize what I just said? If a husband gives a get to his wife against her will, biblically, is this woman divorced or not divorced? Min ha-Torah, if a husband gives a get to a wife against her will, is she divorced or not divorced?
Torah, yes.
According to what we learned so far, yes.
Rabbeinu Gershom somehow draws on a particular kind of rabbinic authority to say, not only do I not want you to do that, I actually don't allow you to do that. And that woman would not be divorced. That's a whole nother level of rabbinic authority. And I just feel so strongly with Vered now when we're saying that, unfortunately, we'll talk next week what happened that now things have changed. But if the tradition is left on its own devices, there's actually a lot more sensitivity and appreciation for the problems, so to speak, in the system. And there's a lot more attempt to, so to speak, fix those issues. And to me, one of the greatest examples is Rabbi Gershom. Now, the question, though, is, and I want to ask you that question and explore this with you a little bit further, is what's really going on there? I mean, Rabbi Gershom did not go to Jaffa, right? He was not under the inspiration of the feminist movement. He didn't read Betty Friedan or Miss Magazine or whatever, What do you think was going on that all of a sudden he's so concerned about lahashvot? Remember, he thinks there's an imbalance, there's an inequality, and I have to create equality. What do you think was going on? What, just speculate, guess, think. What do people think was going on, and that kind of
what I was saying to Gloria was, somehow or another, he or one of his relatives was involved in a divorce.
So there is some legend. There is some legend about him being involved in such a story, but that's Baba Mises. It's baloney. There's nothing personal about this. Actually, scholars have shown that these legends about how he was married and blah, 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 nothing. Culturally and historically, what do you think could have been the impetus for making him do that? Making him such a shocking takana?
He was very put off by the biblical laws, so he came up with a solution.
Okay, so simply could be just internally. It just kind of didn't jive right with him. It didn't feel right with him, so he felt it was wrong. Okay. Are there other variables that you think that could have perhaps influenced what was going on?
He wanted to keep the family together, I guess, as much as possible.
Okay.
Maybe it was a breaking up a divorce is not just between the man and the woman. It impacts the families and the communities.
Right, correct. That too, absolutely. One last question I'm going to ask you, and then I'm going to explore that a little bit further, is that something that I've learned from my wife, actually, as Bert has mentioned. My wife is a Jewish historian. Jewish historians oftentimes try to think, what was going on in the larger world that perhaps could explain
what year was this? What year was this?
Yeah, so this was, like I said before, his dates are 960 to 1040 in a Christian context, right? So all of that is important. When, where, and how does it happen? And then you start asking yourself, what could have been going on, so to speak, in the air, whether internally and externally, that might help explain why suddenly in the 10th century, some rabbi wakes up and says, this inequality is really troublesome. I'm going to push back hard against it. What do people think? You can speculate and guess, throw it out. The worst thing is going to be, I'm going to say wrong. That's the worst that can happen.
Yeah. So, did it have to do with the fact that, I don't know if there were crusades with them, but, were the Christians imposing themselves and divorce became, something like that?
Okay, so
I don't know.
at least if nothing else, Bert is kind of pointing to a particular place. Say, look, what was going on in Christian society at the time? So we all know a little bit about Christianity. What do we know about Christianity and Christian theology vis-a-vis marriage and all of that?
You can't get divorced
until
in
death
Christianity.
do we part.
Yeah, right. They don't believe in divorce, right? They believe that actually until death do us part, and there's no such thing. A marital union is a permanent union between the God and man, and that cannot be broken up, right? It has to be nullified only in rare circumstances. So perhaps there's a Christian influence there, right? Okay, what else?
Had something to do with women, I think. You know what I'm thinking of? I'm thinking of the book, The Scarlet Letter. I don't know.
Yes. So what are you thinking of?
The Scarlet Letter, how women were, they had no rights. They had no rights at that time. It was totally, they were actually criminalized for certain things. I mean, I'm just thinking of the
Okay.
Scarlet Letter, what happened there.
Yeah,
I don't know if it was maintained.
that's all good. Okay, so fortunately for us, there is another scholar, an Israeli scholar, called by the name of Avraham Grossman. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Very important scholar who's written extensively on the medieval period, and he has also written books that I highly recommend. And one of those books is called Pious and Rebellious, which is a fascinating book. I really, really recommend it. It's so interesting about the role of women in medieval Europe. It's shocking. He makes 3 observations explaining of what went on at the time that helps explain why Rabbi Gershom became such a feminist. And he says 3 things. First thing he says is something that Bert was referring to, which is the Christian influence. And I'm going to read extensively, so follow with me on the screen if you can. The campaign against
We
polygamy.
can't see it. We can't see it. It's not on the screen. It's not on the screen.
Please share the
sorry.
screen.
We just see your
We see
your
you, but we
folders.
don't. We see a blank screen.
Sorry. I know what's going on here. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. Okay. Sorry. Okay. The campaign against polygamy, which among the Christian population came to a conclusion some 150 years before the time of Gershom, and the campaign against concubinage, which took place in his own day, doubtless aroused considerable argument between the clergy, civil authorities, and the population at large. The Jewish townsfolk, who did not always dwell apart in special quarters, must surely have learnt of the problem and come to understand certain cases of friction within their own families that they had never previously considered. My grandfather used to have a line in Yiddish, and the line in Yiddish is, which means whatever happens by the Goyim eventually makes its way to the Jews. It takes about 100 years or so, but eventually it trickles into the Jewish community, right? So once the Jews started noticing that the non-Jews think it's not so nice that we're so frivolous about marriages and relationships, the Jews started thinking, you know what? Maybe we need to fix it too. Maybe we need to change things. So that's kind of an external influence that explains Rabbi Gershom radical change. But then Grossman points out to 2 powerful internal influences. And that is the fact that the Jewish community became more prosperous.
Wow.
Anybody want to kind of think, Ysoscher, what does that have to do? Why does prosperity help explain what was going on?
Prosperous means power.
Prosperous means power also, but I want you to think of also how they became more prosperous.
They can have more than one wife. They could afford it suddenly.
That's a consequence. We'll get to that in a minute. But what does it mean they became more prosperous? What changed?
They were landowners.
They were landowners, but actually they moved from agrarian societies to business.
Merchants.
They were business.
They were merchants.
Right.
What do merchants do?
They trade.
Travel.
They travel. The key to Rabbeinu Gershom is TRAVEL. Two reasons. Number one, husbands were away all the time. And because husbands are away all the time, marriages suffer. And because marriages suffers, the rabbis realized that we need to do things to reinforce Jewish marriages. We have at the time a list of takanot. Let's read it again together. Read it with me. The merchants spent time in many countries, among them Provence, Spain, North Africa, and other Muslim lands. Their stay in these remote places often lasted a number of years. And now various attestations of this are preserved in the responsive literature. This is, we can jump ahead. In order to render more tangible the problem posed for the structure of the family unit by the economic facts of life and the long absences, it is worth quoting a list of the kanot that the rabbis made to reinforce marriages. Because the husbands were away for a long time. The marriage suffers. We have decreed that no one should be permitted to leave his wife for more than 18 months without permission of the court. We have permitted the absence of 18 months only to such a leave out of necessity to earn and provide. You don't run away just like that. Further, number 3, no one may remain away from his wife against her will unless the court of 7 elders before whom the matter is taken needed permission. He can't just run away like that. When the husband returns from his journey, he must remain at home for no less than 6 months. So the point is, the rabbis started realizing that marriages are suffering from being away for business for so long. And one of the things Rabbinic Gershon decrees is, you can't just come home and say, sweetie pie, I think we're done. Like, what do you mean? You were away for 18 months? Of course the marriage is not working. You're going to come back and you work on it. So that's reason number 2. Reason number 2 is Rabbinic Gershon realizes marriages are suffering. And now we're coming to number 3, which is the big one. If the husband is away for business for a long time, what does that do to the wife's place in society?
She's alone.
Again, let
It
me
makes
explain the
her
question.
less. It makes her more vulnerable.
It makes her more vulnerable. And when she becomes vulnerable, what does she do?
She gets lonely. She could.
And then what does she do?
She
Resourceful women, what do?
She could, if you're
They
lonely.
take up the mantle and they become heads of households. And all of a sudden, paradoxically, their status in society rises and rises and rises. So a paradoxical consequence Grossman shows again and again is, from the fact that the men were away, the woman's status rose significantly. To the point when Rabbi Gershom can say, we need to equalize the woman's role in the divorce. Because in every other context, her role is equal now. She runs the home. She pays the bills. She takes the kids to shul. She makes sure they go to school. She is par with her husband. She is the head of a household. How can you then tell me that when it comes to divorce, she's just a passive player? I think it's so powerful, like this unrealized consequence, right? He writes as follows, Rabbi Grossman. Here we go. 2 factors were of outstanding importance for the subject of our consideration. The large number of rich merchants of good family who formed the original nucleus of the local communities in the 9th and 10th centuries, and around whom other people gathered. And let me go here. And the relatively high status of the Jewish women in these communities, a status which was better and more firmly based than in any other parts of the contemporary Jewish world. This superior status was evinced in various ways. For example, in the amount of dowry, the high level of compensation. And as a result, Rabbeinu Gershom thinks it no longer makes sense to treat the woman as an inferior when it comes to divorce.
Could I just say something, Rabbi?
Yeah, sure.
That even today, I mean, women are higher status. they're
Yep.
lawyers, they're doctors, they're professors. My son and my daughter-in-law are equal,
Yep.
equal.
I think that is a big problem that rabbis in the Orthodox community struggle is the dissonance between the gender status outside of the base medrash and the gender reality inside of the base medrash. Right? When you go outside in the world, women are lawyers and doctors and scientists and professors and politicians and all of that. And yet within the Orthodox community, there still is this incredible hierarchy. But what we see here is Rabbeinu Gershom already in the 10th century making this audacious claim. I want to bring you back again to the language of the Rosh. Lahashvot isha leish. There's a terrible imbalance in this inequality, meaning, as we saw now, in the larger world, they're equals. She runs the home. She's taking the kids to shul. She pays the bills. She runs the business at home. And all of a sudden, when it comes to divorce, there's such an imbalance. That imbalance cannot happen.
Amazing.
And that's when Rabbeinu Gershom made this incredible cherem. I mean, people don't appreciate like what this means. You can't do what the Torah lets you to do. The Torah says that you can divorce a woman whenever she wants, and the halacha today is no. If she doesn't want to be divorced, you cannot force her to get a divorce. I think it's phenomenal. I should finish the shiur here because this is the kind of peak of the shiur. Just in order to fill in the picture, I'm just going to kind of say quickly two things. Historically, what happened with this Rabbeinu Gershom is two things, and that's quite surprising. If you would have to pick and guess between Sephardi and Ashkenazi communities, which of those two were much more embracing of the Cherem Rabbeinu Gershom, and which of those were less embracing? Which one would you guess?
Ashkenazi would be more embracing.
Oh, really? Why so?
I thought the Sephardim would be more conservative.
Yeah, so it happens to be that that's the case. And about Judy, what are you going to say?
I thought that the Sephardim, some of them even today, or please correct me if I'm wrong, take more than one wife.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, this is, again, another shiur that we can do for another time. For some reason, there's a huge divide within the communities. Ashkenazim fully embrace it. Rabbeinu Tam, right, the grandson of Rashi, and others fully and excitingly embrace the Rabbeinu Gershom's cherem. In the Sephardi communities, less so. There's a suspicion, there's a discomfort, like, what does it mean? The Torah says you can, how can you say you can't? And then that's where it comes from, this idea that it was only applicable for the first 1,000 years. I don't know if people have heard that. Some people say that it only lasts till 5,000, which is like about a certain amount of time, or it doesn't apply only in this case and that case. I mean, I did a little visual just because I'm a very strong visual learner. So I'm going to share that with you in a minute. But it's interesting that there is a big divide between Ashkenaz and Sfard when it comes to the Cherem Rabbeinu Gershom. I'm sorry, I'm a very visual learner, so it's a little bit small. But basically, in Ashkenaz, people get very excited. Alas, the offense for the dignity of women. This protects families of this, and it upholds the Torah. And yet, in Sfard, there's strong resistance and suspicion. Right?
What happens when a Sephardi marries an Ashkenazi?
Yeah, so that
they have to have two rabbis, two rabbanim,
exactly. So that becomes a big tension between in marriages in Israel. It's happened before a lot of times. That's what happens in a mixed couple. But like I said, the two main critiques in the Sephardi community is, number one, how can you say that it's against the halacha? Torah says otherwise. And then, maybe this only applies for the first 1,000 years. It no longer applies today. So that's kind of what's interesting in terms of Sephardi Ashkenazi divides. And then the two last things I'm going to say is that, interestingly enough, two of the most important Ashkenazi rabbis that some of you might be familiar with. I mean, any of you are familiar with any of these two names?
Sofer and Lando, Rabbi Lando.
Yeah, Rabbi Ysoscher Lando. I'm sorry, just blocking it 1 second. Let me make it a teeny bit smaller so you can see. And then I need to get up. Oops. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Anybody familiar with this?
No.
Okay. If you ask any yeshiva bacher, what do you know about the Ysoscher Lando, the Rabbi Yehuda? Or what do you know about the Chassam Sofer? Anybody know anything about the Chassam Sofer?
Didn't he
He
do
did a lot of
was he the
takanos,
one that
right?
did the Mishnah? No.
No. Judy, what did you say?
He came up with a number of takanot, like one day of Yontif in
Uh,
Israel. No?
no, that's the Chacham Tzvi. You're thinking about the Chacham Tzvi.
That's in Sofer. Yeah. I
Yeah,
heard
Chazam
it.
Sofer and the Noda B'Yehud in general have reputations of being arch conservatives. The Chazam Sofer famously fought against Reform Judaism, and the Noda B'Yehud also kind of fought against Reform. And I tell people always, rabbis are complex. Rabbis are not straightforward. Now, true, when it came to Reform Judaism, these two were arch opponents. When it came to Cherem Rabbeinu Gershom, these two are radical champions of Cherem Rabbeinu Gershom.
Wow.
So much so that Chassam Sofer writes repeatedly, a get that was given in defiance of Rabbeinu Gershom is invalid. In fact, the Noda B'Yehuda talks about a case about someone who was a shaliach to give a get against the will, and he says, "Ein shaliach ledvar avera." You can't become a shaliach to do a sin. It's a sin to divorce a woman against her will, and therefore it doesn't exist.
Wow.
So the point is that you never judge rabbis book by the cover. You can never know who they are. The one last thing that's left, and unfortunately, I mean, we're running out of time, but I just will quickly just share that with you, is that Heter Mei Rabbanim. Anybody know about the Heter Mei Rabbanim?
Is that what you call the prenuptial or not?
No.
Or
Yeah,
my,
yeah,
that's way, I'm jumping centuries.
You could marry more than one woman if you get permission of 100
Yes.
rabbis.
So at some point, this is a long story, but I'm going to do the condensed version. At some point, because the patriarchy, so to speak, was so upset about this kind of, loss of power, they came up with this idea that if 100 rabbis give permission for the husband to divorce the woman against her will, they can override Rabbeinu Gershom. That's called a heter mea rabbanim. If 100 rabbis in particular circumstances, I'm not going to get into the details, but if 100 rabbis agree to override Rabbeinu Gershom, then you can do that. And that has become a very popular mechanism. And unfortunately, it's become a tool of abuse, because very often there will be times when a husband cannot get a get from the wife because he hasn't settled, alimony or, child support and all of that. And in the Haredi community, it's become almost a business. There are people who go around to kollels and say, "Oh, would you sign this Mei Rabbanim?" Because, there's a whole conversation. Does it have to be a rabbi? Does it not have to be a rabbi? And it's become this big business, this big industry. But the good news is that in the last 20 years, there has been a tremendous pushback against it. In fact, I know for a fact in Chovevei, and I'm almost sure it's true in YU as well, when you get smicha, you're told that you're not allowed to sign a heter mei rabbanim.
Unbelievable.
Yes, because it has become a system of abuse. It has become a system of abuse, and not only has it become a system of abuse, nobody really has gotten to the bottom of the origin. Where does it come from? Where do we know this idea that 100 rabbanim can override a decree from a 19th century scholar? Where does it come from? But that has become the routine, and I have to say, when I was in Kollel and Borough Park, I remember at least 3 instances where just a random person shows up in Kollel and goes over to any other. Would you sign this heter mei rabbanim? You sign heter mei rabbanim? Like, well, I don't know what the story is. Hey, trust me. Like, why would I trust you? But it's become this kind of patriarchal pushback against women have too much rights and women have too much privileges. Sure, I'll sign it. And it's become a terrible abuse to the system, and also a tragic statement about the reality, how people are uncomfortable with the fact that within the tradition, within the system, there already are built-in mechanisms to address this imbalance, Anyway.
Can I ask one question? Can I ask a
But I'm
question?
going to say one funny story, and then I'm going to take a question, and then we'll finish. So, by the way, just last thing. So, the funny story about this always is that the Noda B'Yehuda, who I mentioned to you a minute ago, just B'Cheskel Landau, he once told his students that, actually, I don't think that for a heter mei rabbanim, you need 100 rabbis. 100 Talmidei Chachamim are good enough too. And the joke is that his student says, Rabbi, that's a chumrah. It's much easier to find 100 rabbis than 100 Talmidei Chachamim. You're actually making a chumrah, not a chumrah.
Rabbi, you are amazing. I need to go. I'm so looking forward to next week. You're an incredible lecturer. I so appreciate
Thank you.
it.
I really appreciate that.
Amazing. Amazing.
Thank you. Anybody, any other questions before we leave?
Yeah, question. What would the Qumranim at the first part of our talk today, what was their attitude toward divorce?
Yes, so that's very interesting. Thank you that you're asking. There actually are, quite a lot of essays, and you can guess. Because
they were more strict, so then they say forget it.
In fact, I mean, this is a longer conversation, Judy, but thank you for bringing it up. Scholars have written extensively about the level of influence from the Qumran community to early Christianity, right? And one of the influences is their attitude against divorce. We actually have evidence that in the Qumran community, there's an aversion towards divorce because, divorce, thank you, Gary. Divorce is the marriage is a divine union and divine unions cannot be undone. They take these rabbinic theologies to the extreme, right? And they to the point where, you can't be undone, which is the basis for Christian, inability to divorce. So, yeah. Thank you, everybody. It was really wonderful seeing you
so much.
Back. I will be back in 2 weeks. And the rabbis are not as bad as you thought. That's the most important takeaway in one word, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's great.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Sure. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Okay. Take care.
Thank you.